Whether on the field, on the court, or on the balance beam, there's more to winning than the final score. Hi, I'm Patrick Manning of Black Desert Resort. We recognize the effort it takes to succeed. That's why we are proud to partner with the Utah Checkdown, the podcast that tells you the story before the game, then gives you a recap of what happened when it's all over. The grit, the glory, and the disappointments. Join us for stories of Utah's finest athletes and coaches. Thanks for listening.
You're listening to the Utah Checkdown Podcast. And now your host, Josh Furlong.
Welcome back to another edition of the Utah Checkdown Podcast. I am Josh Furlong. Happy to be back with you again today. I know it's coming once again on some bad juju, bad vibes, bad mojo, whatever you want to describe it as. It just hasn't been great, and Utah is in a world of discomfort right now at 4-4 on the season, and not a lot of answers for itself. So we'll jump into that, but let me first tell you about our partners, Black Desert, who are helping with the KSL.com Beyond the Game video series. The videos highlight various athletes and give an inside look into their life. Recently, we talked with former Utah offensive lineman Garrett Bowles about how a second chance at life allowed him to pay it forward to troubled youth. You can check out that video and many others on KSL.com. Black Desert is a new resort destination in St. George that features a championship Tom Weiskopf 19-hole golf course that combines a private club filled with destination resort golf amid lava fields and 360-degree vistas. Black Desert is changing entertainment in southern Utah, and they're just beginning. Black Desert, where remarkable is within reach. Home of the Black Desert Championship PGA Tour. All right, so yes, we're back at the same spot where Utah is coming off of another loss, 4 straight. First time since 2017 that Utah has lost 4 straight. I saw on social media that a lot of people were going to 1997. No, it's been much sooner than that. So this has happened, but it's not all too familiar for Utah fans as of recent, right? I mean, I think how this has gone, you would expect that there would be better results, right? At the beginning of the season, the projections were obviously that Utah would be the favored team to win the Big 12, it was a realistic possibility. And I still think this team had the roster to be able to do it, and obviously Cam got hurt and changed some of that. But this is a roster that has the talent. This isn't devoid of talent or depth or any of that aspect. It's just a team that is in a rut, honestly, and they can't get out of it. And you're seeing everything just kind of snowball where, you're not making the same types of plays that you would when you're playing loose and having fun and everybody's playing for each other. Right now, there's a lot of finger pointing and a lot of trying to figure out what's going on. And the reality is it's not just one thing. This is a team that is losing in multiple facets of the game. Now, granted, the defense is doing most of their job. And I went over this last week where I talked to you about how, the defense has held teams enough to be able to win games. I mean, even this week, Utah held Houston to 17 points. So it's not like this was some otherworldly number and they scored like 42 points and Utah was just totally outmatched. This is just a game that, once again, Utah's offense couldn't get going. Some of that is in relation to the defense and not getting, stops in the run game, and we'll talk about that. But this is just an all-around effort in terms of losing. And we can come back to this every single week and go over it, and we will, because, that's my job. But it's one of those things where Utah just, until they can finally get out of that rut, and it's very difficult to do that, it's a challenge. It's why you're seeing a team like Florida State. They just can't get out of it, right? And it just continues to snowball and compound on each other, and you can't do it. They were an undefeated season last year up until the very end, and then, things snowball and things happen. So it's not like this is totally unusual, but it is unusual in the sense of what, the preseason projections were. This is a team that still has the talent. Like I said, it's just not being utilized the way that it needs to. It's not the players aren't doing what they need to. It's just an all-around effort. So how the game ended, obviously, if you watched it, if you cared to watch it, the game was 14-14 coming down to the end. Utah had one last chance, had about 8 minutes left when they got the ball. They kind of take a lot of the time off as you're supposed to do as a team, as you want to go and win. And you go and they get to about midfield, and Brandon Rose, who was thrown in as the backup quarterback, now turned starter for the second half. He throws an interception. And essentially, Houston wears out the clock and kicks a game-winning field goal to win that game. So, not a lot going on in this game. Quite honestly, it was just kind of a bit of a slogfest, and it felt very reminiscent in some respects to that Northwestern Bowl game last year. So, obviously, super exciting and super fun. And no, none of that. So this is where Utah's at, right? Like. We'll start, let's say, at the very end. Whittingham's calling timeouts, allowing Houston to be able to have more time, allowing them to be able to do what they wanted to do. And I understand the rationale to do that to some extent, but it didn't work. And ultimately, they got the first down and kicked the field goal and were able to do what they wanted. And, the game ends that way. This is also the first game where Mike Bajakian is the new offensive coordinator, the interim offensive coordinator. And I don't know that you can fully, summarize, what you've got with him, right? I think there was definitely some new wrinkles that were thrown in there. There were some new things that were mixed in that, got people excited. A few different things that changed how Utah was looking offensively, especially early when they were moving the ball. But it's tough to judge an offensive coordinator in 5 days, right? He didn't get the job essentially until, depending on when you want to know, Sunday night or Monday, morning or afternoon, whatever it is, doesn't really matter. It becomes a challenge to be able to suddenly turn everything over and expect to be completely fixed, right? Or even to have like a whole bunch of understanding of what to do. And yes, he had been in the offense. He's an offensive analyst. He's working with the QBs. This isn't something where he was just totally unlearned from what this offense was. But at the same time, when it's yours and you're trying to scheme and game plan, that puts a lot more pressure on you. I'm sure the meetings are different for him. Just being able to kind of give that perspective. The film study is going to be different that week because you've lost some elements there. It's just an all-around change. And so coming into this game, expecting wholesale changes was never going to be a reality. Coming into the next game, against BYU, there's potential for more wholesale changes, and you've got another week to be able to kind of help with that. But it's still not going to be this huge wholesale change, right? It's going to be very similar. There's some new wrinkles. You can throw in some new things. But more importantly, he got some new players in there, right? You got Jalen Glover in there. We haven't seen him since, I believe, week 2, if I'm remembering correctly. And Glover did well in his time. He had 4 carries and got 33 yards, so he was averaging 8.3 yards per carry. Did well. Honestly, a little surprised that they didn't utilize him more, given this. I had to kind of sidetrack here. I mean, this is the thing that is one of the most baffling things to me of this game. We talk about the play calling and we talk about kind of things here. Going into this game, you knew 100% that Houston's defense was far better in the passing game than they were in the run game. Now, some of that changes because you have a freshman quarterback under center and they're going to put more pressure. But the reality is Houston really didn't put that much pressure on this offensive line. They weren't rushing, 5 to 6, 7 guys all the time. They actually were pretty vanilla in most of their approach. And I'm going to go back and watch a lot of this film and kind of see how it worked out because I want to do some stuff on Thursday to hopefully break down some of this if we can get it all to work. But not just that game, but other games. But this is, one of those scenarios where they just didn't run the ball that much. You go into this game thinking this is going to be the case, and they ended up only running the ball. Let's see, how many times was it? 26 times, right? Mekhi Bernard had 14 touches. Glover had 4. Brandon Rose rushed it 3 times, and Isaac Wilson rushed it 5 times. And so 2 of those, 8 of those yards 8 of those carries, were from your quarterbacks. And some were designed But for the most part, that's not really what it was. So between the two actual running backs, you had 18 attempts, right? Mekhi Bernard could get that on his own. And yet you still didn't utilize a lot of that offensive game plan, in the run game where the Houston defense just hasn't been great. They obviously had their moments where they looked better, and they stopped Mekhi Bernard better than they did Jalen Glover. But that's the point. Mix and match. Do different things to be able to get in there and utilize them, right? If Mekhi's not working, use Jalen. If Jalen's not working, use Mekhi. Use, Dijon Stanley in different scenarios. And, look, I'm not going to pick apart this fully to the extent that the play calling is different because it's situational and there's different things that have to happen. And if you don't get this, you can't get that. I get that, right? But at the same time, going into this game, to me, it felt like there should have been a stronger emphasis there. You once again try to get that emphasis into the game plan of what you want to do, set the tone, get Isaac Wilson comfortable so that when the run game is being established, they have to kind of respect that. They try to put more pressure, try to stop that run, and then those passing lanes become much more easy, right? And look, I get it. Like Isaac threw a 71-yard, well, it wasn't a 71-yard pass, but it goes for 71 yards on a quick tunnel screen to Brant Keithy, who takes it the rest of the way for 71 yards. And so it's easy to kind of get some comfortability out of that. But at the same time, you kind of went away from the game plan that everybody's expecting you to do. And that's not a bad thing, right? It's not a bad thing to be able to have that. Now, granted, and I'll get into this, the run blocking still is not where it needs to be. That's not to say that they can't be there, though, that they can't do it. Jalen Glover was most effective on the outside. He didn't really run it up the middle much. He ran it off the outside. And guess what? He got big yards almost every single time that he did it. So it's not that it wasn't there for the taking. It's just Utah didn't utilize it. They didn't do much with it. And that became a challenge, right? So you have that as a facet. Now, this game, more than any game, I would have to say, it's coming down to the debate between Isaac Wilson and Brandon Rose, right? Depending on what side of the aisle you stand on, and this is becoming a very hotly contested debate lately, you either think Isaac Wilson is not ready for the. Well, I think everybody understands that Isaac Wilson is just not ready for this in the sense that turning it over to a freshman quarterback is not easy, right? I don't think anybody's going to argue with that. I think that's a universal truth that anybody can understand that he's just not ready for that yet. The real question comes down to is whether you believe he will ever have it and he should get that job, or if somebody like a Brandon Rose, who, mind you, Isaac Wilson beat out, is the better option. And there's no more favorite person on a team than the backup, right? Especially when things are struggling. And so, this is kind of where it's at. Isaac Wilson goes 13 of 22 for 171 yards and 1 touchdown, completing 59%. Not great, but not terrible either. You obviously want to see those numbers better, but for the most part, especially early on, he did well. I mean, he started the game 8 of 9, passing for 120 yards, and yes, that Keithy run of 70 yards is going to go into that, but that's not his fault, right? Once again, those are the plays you want, and so you can't give him the credit when those things happen, but then fault him when they do. You know what I mean? This is kind of where it's at. At the end of the day, he gets benched in the third quarter. He didn't finish with the best grades on Pro Football Focus. But what happened was, early on in the second quarter, Utah is right on the 1 yard line, their 1 yard line after getting a goal line stop from the defense, the one of 2. And, he rolls out and gets tackled in the back of the end zone pretty hard and lands on his non-throwing wrist, on his shoulder, and comes up injured. They have to take him off for 2 plays. He eventually comes back into the game. But there came a moment where after that, you saw a noticeable difference in how he played. Now, once again, my job is not here to excuse this, right? And I don't want to sit here and kind of be this Isaac Wilson defender. That's not my job. But at the same time, there was a noticeable difference. And, I don't know that an injury necessarily fully impacted that. I honestly don't know. I've gotten some insight from sources that say it might have had an impact. But at the end of the day, he was benched mostly for the chance to get a spark, right? Utah wasn't moving the ball as they needed to. And so Kyle Whittingham or Bajakian, I'm not entirely sure. I'd have to imagine it's Whittingham, but he decided to, pull him and told him that he was, going to sit and Brandon Rose was going to be in there. So this is where this becomes a challenge, right? So you've already felt that Isaac Wilson, an 18-year-old kid, is your guy. You've expected him to be the future. And that's not to say that just because you've declared that at the beginning of the season that, he has to be the guy and he's going to be the guy for the next 4 years at Utah. None of that has to be true, right? There's a chance that, Isaac's time at Utah is done and they move on, and that's the direction that they decide to go. Who knows? I mean, that's up to them. They have to be the ones to make that decision, and that's why they get paid the big bucks. And you can fault it for all you want or celebrate it for what you want, and that's your prerogative as a fan. Okay. Now, the thing is, though, that if Isaac is your future, and I think many in that coaching staff believe that he is, that's not to say that they wouldn't, entertain graduate transfers or try to get some more experience in that room. But that as of right now, Isaac Wilson is the future. And that doesn't even have to be next year. It could be 2 years from now if you can get kind of a more veteran guy, coach him up in the system, help him out. I mean, it's not an easy task to just be able to throw that on a freshman QB. Okay, we get that. The point here, though, is if you really are trying to get Wilson the time, the help to be able to get those reps, the reps are what matters the most, then you have to stay with him, right? You're crushing a kid's confidence. You're taking him out of a situation when, by and large, he really didn't have the worst game. Now, you can look at it from some aspects of it where, yes, he was getting pressured. He was, having problems in the pocket at times. Wasn't recognizing the blitz in some areas. That's all, once again, those are all freshman mistakes. This isn't something out of the ordinary. This is not something there. There's times where he's trying to look to make the bigger play instead of making the safe play. Once again, those are freshman things. So if that's what you want to be okay living with, you've got to live with it. Utah isn't going to the Big 12 championship game, right? They weren't going if all of a sudden they beat Houston. Sure, once again, as I talked about, there's this path that's going to happen. There's no path. There's nothing there. So if you truly believe that he is the future and you need to give him the reps needed, there's no advantage to taking him out. Whether he's struggling or not, there's no advantage to taking him out, especially if it's just to try to get a spark. Now, with that said, there's a scenario there where you've got to teach a young quarterback, right? You've got to teach him that these things matter. You're not just going to get this job and it's yours and everything's going to be great, right? Like, you've got to be getting into the film study more. You've got to be practicing more. You've got to be able to get the routes down with your teammates. You've got to, all these things have to matter, right? It's real easy for a freshman to come in and have this perception of what they can be and actually delivering on the field. It takes time. That's the same way in the NFL. It's the same way in any level. You've got to be able to meet, at the very minimum, meet the expectations and exceed them as a quarterback to be able to really function, right? You've got to be able to do it. But at the same time, you don't know what you don't know, right? You come into that system, you expect yourself to be this top-notch quarterback that comes in and is able to do everything that he needs to, and then you get there and realize, okay, this is tougher, this is harder, I've got to do this. On top of school, I've got to be able to watch a ton of film. I have to understand this offense better than every single person on this field outside of the offensive coordinator. The wide receiver, Dorian Singer or Brant Keithy, they don't understand it. They don't have to understand it the same way that you do. You have to go in there and do that. And so there are those aspects where, yes, you're teaching a kid that this is the repercussions of not doing that. And I'm not saying he isn't doing that, but you're teaching him there are consequences, right? And you've got to be able to do it. But at the same time, it's a double-edged sword, because if you do that, you take a kid's confidence away, you make him doubt himself, and it becomes a real challenge. And so it's not something that you should use lightly, right? At the same time, and I'm not going to sit here and say that Kyle did it the right way or the wrong way. I think it was a little odd that they made the change, but at the same time, I don't fault them either for wanting to get a spark. You want to be able to win a game. You want to give your offense something. And for as much struggles and turmoil that's going on in this with this team, a win at the end of the day is going to make a team feel better, right? You finally got that monkey off your back. You're doing what you need to. They've been talking for weeks about, we've got to do the right things. We've got to do this. And nothing seems to be working. And so until that happens, it becomes this big challenge. And so these little mistakes that every team has in the country, you can look at even Oregon, who's the number one team in the country. You can look at Texas, you can look at Alabama, Georgia, all these teams. There's little things always that are going to snowball, little things that are going to make it so those teams aren't effective, right? And you see it all the time, especially from the national media perspective, where they nitpick little things, and they should, because you've got to be able to look at these teams. And if you're going to be in the top 5, they're going to nitpick every little thing because you're supposed to be at the top, right? The real problem there, though, is when you start losing, those little things snowball so fast. Those things compound on each other. Suddenly, a turnover or a penalty in a key situation or a missed field goal or, whatever it may be, suddenly those things just continue to grow louder and they become harder, and then everybody's in their head. And so you come into a game each week and suddenly nothing is working. That's where Utah's at. Utah doesn't, Utah knows how to do the things on offense, right? They can do it. Micah Bernard has rushed for over 100 yards 4 times this season. Isaac Wilson has led a team down the field really easily on offense. And yes, they didn't score in the red zone. And some of those we've documented and talked about how the play calling wasn't great. He's also a freshman, and you've got to give him some comfortable passes and things to be able to help him. All of those things are there. But when everything isn't going right, this is what happens, right? You have a team that doesn't believe in itself. And they say it. Micah Bernard says that they believe and they're going to continue to keep fighting. And, I'm going to have you listen to this audio in a sec. But at the same time, all of these things matter. And so in this same scenario, if you bench Isaac Wilson, it matters because now you're putting distrust in him. You're saying that he is maybe not the guy. And look, I don't know what the faction or the makeup of the teams are in terms of whether they believe that Isaac is the guy or they don't, or they want a new blood, whatever it may be. I don't really care. At the end of the day, any doubt that you're putting into that adds to that, right? And so now you're coming into this bye week with another loss, going through your on paper, easiest part of the schedule, and you've lost all of them. And now there's this QB controversy hanging over you, and the fans are debating it. The media is going to debate it, and maybe internally they're debating it. Kyle talked about that they're going to debate it, over the break and kind of see what it is after they go through the film and everything. But now all of that's once again putting doubt into their mind. All of this is continually doing things to be able to make them feel like they're not good enough, right? That's the tough thing. Like, this Utah team is in a very bad spot. And until they can find a way to get out of that, they can have all the player run meetings that they want. Until they can do whatever they want to do to be able to make them feel like they can do it, it's not going to change. You're going to go into this rivalry game against BYU, and it's not suddenly going to change. Like, there's things that can, but you've got to gain that positive momentum. You've got to be able to move forward, and nothing is changing. And so Utah's stuck, right? And if you can't beat BYU, I'm not using BYU because BYU is a very good team. But if you can't beat a Houston, where do you go? You look at the schedule. You've got BYU, Iowa State, Colorado, and UCF left on the schedule. Can Utah even get to a bowl game? I don't know. Honestly, I think that Houston game was the pivotal game to be able to get to a bowl game. And if you don't get to a bowl game, what a drop-off. But at the same time, that's where Utah's at. I don't think anybody would be surprised if Utah lost these last 4 games. That's just the nature of where we're at, right? This is a team that is fractured. And until they can figure it out, it doesn't matter what the fans say. It doesn't matter what anybody the outside influences, which are getting louder, and you can't tell me that these players don't see it. And that's not the fans' fault. They've got to, the fans, they can have their voices and they can do what they want, as they should. That's their job. They're the ones paying the bills at the end of the day. But if the team can't do it, they can't figure it out. If the coaching staff can't figure it out, this is where they're at. And you've essentially lost your team and the rest of the season's over. And that very well could be the case. So that's the thing. So now you're looking at this from a quarterback standpoint, right? Who is going to be the starter? Brandon Rose comes in. He goes 0 for 5 to start. He goes 1 for 7. And eventually starts to pick it up, but things just don't look perfect, right? I know he had more composure in the pocket. There was more in that element, and there should be as a more veteran player. But after 3 years, there still wasn't enough from that game where you're like, you know what, Brandon's the guy, right? This wasn't the situation where Cam Rising comes in that San Diego State game, and you're like, holy cow, this is the quarterback, right? And if it's that narrow enough, at this point, why are you just not sticking with your freshman? There was a throw that Brandon had where he threw it into triple coverage and lofted the ball up like crazy, and it almost got picked off. He's lucky that it didn't get picked off. He obviously gets picked off at the very end of the game, essentially ends it for Utah. He finishes with only 45 yards and 47% completion percentage. That's not better than Isaac. And that's, once again, not me defending Isaac. That's just the facts. And so you've got to look at this and you say, if you're trying to give your team a spark, did you get that spark? No, you didn't. Yeah, you got a touchdown out of him. And I would argue that none of that was him because the defense made a play. Jonathan Hall picked it off, got Utah in, just outside of the red zone. And then Mekhi Bernard rushed it in for 14 yards. Right up the middle, untouched. The offensive line did the work. Brandon Rose didn't do the work. So now what do you do? Right? Okay, so you've got a quarterback now that looks a little bit more confident in the pocket. Isaac has in the past, but he's trying to rush things, and the offensive line's not giving them protection at times that he needs. He also just needs to have a little bit more pocket awareness. He also has to settle his feet. He has to be able to make those easy plays and not try to always make that 71-yard pass, right? Like, all those things contribute. But at the end of the day, did Brandon Rose really win out that job? And Kyle Whittingham's going to have to figure that out. He's going to have to look at that and say, is this a situation in practice where Brandon is getting better? He's got more control of this. Also, to Brandon's credit, he was only given, 20-25% of the offense that week leading up to that game in a new system under Mike Bajakian. That's a very tough situation, right? And so it's tough to see if this was really who Brandon Rose is, or is this, just a circumstance of not really having a lot of playing time, not getting a lot of reps. Before this, he was, QB3 and wasn't getting a ton of reps. So all of these things contribute. Maybe he is good, right? Maybe he is. But I think from the initial onset of this, there wasn't anything to show that he gave the team a much better spark. Now, maybe it's similar to the offensive coordinator position, right? You're trying to give a new voice. You're trying to help it out. You're trying to give kind of a new spark that way. It's worked. Like I said, Cam Rising did it. He stole the show and stole the job, and everything worked. I don't think you got that same situation here. If anything, it was more just kind of the same stuff. So this is the tough part, right? Like, in anybody making declarative statements about, oh, Brandon's the guy because of XYZ, you didn't see anything. You can make some arguments about Isaac Wilson and how he's struggling, and yes, he is. He's a freshman quarterback. He's going to make those mistakes. And for any of you that only watch Utah football, this isn't unusual. Dylan Raiola, phenomenal freshman quarterback, was making some throws in that Ohio State game that if he could have just done a little bit better and had a little bit more experience and knew where he needed to go, they absolutely beat Ohio State. They probably beat him by 2 touchdowns. Freshman quarterbacks are going to make those mistakes, right? The very last play of Dylan Raiola's of time against Ohio State, he threw it right to the safety. Wasn't even close. This is no different for a lot of these quarterbacks, right? Freshmen, it takes time. That's why you don't usually put a freshman in as a starter. And yeah, I want to go over, like I said, on Thursday, I want to try to go over this and kind of look at this compared to Utah quarterbacks that played as a freshman, other quarterbacks that played as a freshman. Yeah, there might still be a situation where Isaac is probably not as good as some of those players. Okay, that's fine. The reality is this is what you've got. So, you can complain and you can do all this stuff that you want to be able to say that Isaac isn't ready, and he's not. He needs time. He needs time under his system. He thought he was going to get a year under Cam Rising, a year under Andy Ludwig, and he was going to get that time. Does he want to start? 100%. What player doesn't want to start? But at the same time, if you're being honest, you take that truth serum and you tell yourself, what would be the best for myself? It's learning behind the best players for any freshman. And you can sit there and you can go out and say, no, I'm the guy. I can go do it. Yeah, like I believe that he truly believes that. But at the same time, the thing that's going to benefit you the most is having a veteran quarterback there to be able to teach you. You see that in the NFL. Look, Jordan Love is now considered one of the better quarterbacks in the league. And he had to sit, on the bench for what was it, 4 years, 3-4 years behind Aaron Rodgers before he got a shot. That's invaluable. You learn, you grow. Now you're not considered this bust because if you would have come out there, that year coming out of Utah State, he was not great. He had more interceptions than almost anyone in the country. You're going to go take that to the league and suddenly you're going to be this phenomenal quarterback? It's like, why do we judge all these quarterbacks their rookie season and suddenly think that they have to be this great player or they're a bust? You can look at that with Isaac's older brother, Zach, right? Number 2 quarterback. Goes to a terrible franchise. Sorry, Josh Newman, but it is. And you're expected to suddenly be this hero and turn around a franchise and everything's going to be great. It just doesn't happen that often. There's very few quarterbacks that can do it. You're seeing that somewhat with Jaden Daniels right now and just phenomenal plays that he's been able to make. But all of those things that we're building, right? Some of the habits that he had at LSU absolutely contributed to this. He also went to an organization that, now that their owner's gone, is in a much better situation to be able to have success. They have had success recently. They're not constantly at the bottom. Those things matter. Utah had that, right? They had that all for Isaac Wilson. You had Cam Rising. You expected him to come in, and this was going to be the year, right? Utah was going to the Big 12 championship. The Big 12 opponents weren't going to mean anything to him. And honestly, anybody on this schedule really wouldn't have meant anything, right? We've talked about this. Utah's defense is holding them well enough. Cam has proven that he could have gotten Utah at minimum 21 points every game, which would essentially have won almost every single game this season. And I guarantee you he would have gotten more than that. But now you're sitting here trying to go with a freshman quarterback who you're putting all these assertions on of who he is as a quarterback because of where he's at. He got thrown into this essentially the second game of the season. That's not easy. He wasn't expecting that. He didn't have the habits yet. Andy Ludwig had talked about it, that coming into the offseason, he kind of forgot some of that stuff, and probably some of that is he wasn't taking it as seriously as he needed to coming into fall camp because he knew Cam was going to be the guy. Now, that's on him, right? That's not an excuse, and I'm not sitting here once again trying to help him. But at the same time, these things all matter. It takes time to learn habits, and that's where they're at. But the quarterback battle is not fully your problem. It is, don't get me wrong. Like, the quarterback has to be able to function, right? He has to be able to do his job to be able to get the offense moving. That's his job. Isaac had 171 yards. Brandon had 45. Different situations, I get that. But let's go to the next part. Lack of rushing. Utah finished the game with 90 total yards rushing. Mekhi Bernard had 51 on 14 carries. He averaged 3.6, which is actually one of the lowest outputs that he's had all season. Jalen Glover, as I mentioned, 33 yards on 4 carries, 8.3 yards. Second highest graded player on PFF this week from Utah. The reality is they didn't run the ball a lot, and when they did, they didn't have as much success against a team that has been terrible in the run game. So that's a combination of two things. The offensive line, they're not getting the push that they need to, and honestly, their grades aren't that great. They're not terrible, but they're not great either, right? They're absolutely mid. And so you're not getting the push that you need to. The play calling isn't there, and your running backs aren't seeing the holes that they need to, right? Or they're just not getting enough plays. In a situation of Jalen Glover, who has been gone all year, with very little explanation on why, other than Mike Mitchell beat him out, and yet Mike Mitchell didn't get any carries. Suddenly, Jalen Glover is there. And he performed. He took those minutes, and he absolutely did what he needed to. So now that leads to more speculation of why was Jalen Glover on the sideline. You didn't see Mike Mitchell. Yes, he's been banged up, but at the same time, you haven't seen him for the last few weeks. Mekhi Bernard has done well, and so you're willing to give him the 51 yards on, 3.6 yard average. Sure, whatever. Not everything's going to be great. But he only ran the ball 14 times. And he was expected to do a lot with it. There still wasn't a ton there. Combined there, if you can get a run game going, Utah can be effective, right? Like I said, 90 total yards against this Houston defense. That's not great. They didn't scheme it up well. They didn't help. They didn't get what they needed to in the run game. And now you're back looking at that and saying, what did we do, right? They need to be more effective there. That offensive line needs to be more effective. They've taken some injuries recently, and it's not going to get any better. You've got some phenomenal guys on that line, especially your two tackles that have been able to do really well with pass blocking, and run blocking hasn't been as well, but they've been decent, right? That doesn't mean that they're immune or that they haven't done well, but the interior's getting blown up. The line is coming in, they're crashing in, and suddenly that pocket collapses. And most recently, Isaac has had to try to fend for his life. And once again, as a freshman quarterback, his pocket presence has been good, and he's got great escapability, which is what they were excited about. But at the same time, if you don't see that blindside, defensive end coming your way, you're screwed. And that's where he was at. Took 2 sacks, had one where he fumbled the ball because he took a hit. It happens, right? But at the same time, all of these things matter. Everything has to work together to be able to do it. You can probably find some fault in the wide receiver room, and I've got to go look at the video that I have of it and kind of look at some film that way before I really dive into that. But players have to run better routes, right? And I don't know if they aren't. I mean, I know there's many players that continue to get open, and so it hasn't been a bad thing. But at the same time, this is a team that all has to work in unison to be able to do it, and the offense just isn't. And so I want to play the audio from the end of the game. This is Mekhi Bernard and Karene Reed in a very short interview. We didn't get a ton of time with them. We don't get a ton of time with players as it is, or the coaching staff. For whatever reason, Utah really wants to limit a lot of this stuff. But in losses, it becomes even less. So I'm going to play the entire press conference that we had with the players. Like I said, Mekhi Bernard and Karene Reed. Many of you have probably seen the tweet that I put out there of what Mekhi said. It's kind of blown up, and people are kind of listening. They've got their opinions on it. But I want to play it in its entirety, let you hear it, see what's going on, and we can talk about it.
Obviously, you guys started off well, and then things kind of just stalled out again. Kind of where are you seeing it all fall apart today?
Can't answer that. I'm not going to answer that. I know what it is, but I'm not going to answer that.
Can you give us any insight as to what that'll be? Or?
No, I'm sorry. Can't. Sorry. Appreciate y'all. Appreciate you.
Karene, I mean, you guys fought tough on the defensive side. Obviously, they did well with the run game, but kind of, you guys were still in the game. I mean, how frustrating is this in this situation?
Super frustrating. We played tough. Obviously, it's not good enough. Shouldn't have allowed 17 points to start off with. So we got to be better.
Where do you go from this?
Man, you can only go one way. You can only go one way. We've lost, what is this, 4 now? Straight? Where do we go now? We keep going to try to get a win. You got to keep going, try to get a win. We got to figure something out, and we have to put, like I've been saying, the W into the win column. That's the only way we can go. Nobody's going to fall off. Nobody's going to quit on the team. We love football. We just got to love winning more.
Kai, after the Arizona State, or I think it was the TCU loss, Kyle said that keeping the locker room together was one of the number one things. Have you sensed any of that, I guess, down the stretch of 4 games, just a fracture in the locker room, or just quit from anybody on the team?
Nah, like I said, I haven't seen none of that. I mean, I love these boys on the defensive side. They love us on the offensive side. We just got to put it together now. I've seen no divide. We're always intermingling. After each drive, they come to us, say we got this. We go to them, say we got this. There's no split. There's no divide. We have good love for each other all through the locker room, on both sides of the ball, together, everything. So we just gotta keep going.
Okay. Do you feel like you're seeing signs of progress offensively that you can build on moving forward?
Oh yeah, I mean, there's a lot of progress that we've been seeing. We just got to put it in all 4 phases. We got to run the ball efficiently. We didn't really run the ball efficiently today. They had a good plan for that. We got to throw the ball better. We didn't really throw the ball that well today. I think we gave up 2 turnovers. That's correct. Coach Witt says it all the time, we can't turn over the ball. We got to win the turnover margin, and I don't think we won the turnover margin today. So
that's where it's at. Mekhi Bernard especially listed out a lot of what's going on. At the end of the day, this Utah team needs to want to win, right? And maybe there's some situational stuff where as the team, as you know, as he says, it's not fractured, there may be some individualism going on. And if you've been on social media, you maybe see some of this from some of the players where they're frustrated, where guys want their own, right? You know, you want to be able to perform, especially if this is your last year. You want to be able to perform and you want to be on the field. And sometimes that takes that kind of takes a life of its own, and players aren't playing to win, they're playing for themselves. And that becomes a challenge, right? And I think you're seeing some of that with what Mekhi Bernard said. You know, his answer onto him knowing what it is, but he's not going to say, that doesn't play very well to a lot of people because they want to, you know, he's the captain of a team now, and he's not going to put that out in front of media. I actually don't have a problem with it. You know, seeing it on Twitter, it's really easy to take things out of construct or out of you know, the situation it's in, and not really understand what's going on with it. But at the same time, you know, there are problems, and the fact that he can identify it and feels like he has a good handle on it, you know, that leads to a lot of speculation onto what it is. Is it, you know, the team now has problems with Isaac Wilson? Is it the team has problems in the run game and they're just not getting enough? Is the team have problems, you know, with its wide receivers or offensive lines? Is it a culture thing? Like, there's just so many things that you can go off of from that, right? And it leads it open to the fans and everybody else to speculate on what he's meaning. I spent a lot of time after that game contemplating fully on what I think it is. And at the end of the day, whether it's sources or people close inside the program, a lot of them aren't going to speak to that, right? They're not going to give up that information. That's close to them, and that's the players, you know, and they've got to figure it out and understand what it is. There's a lot of people that you're going to see on social media that haven't figured out, right? I've already had somebody tweet at me today saying that the problem is Isaac Wilson. You know, that a lot of people have been tweeting that, right? And I get it. I get if you think that's the problem. And ultimately, yes, the ball isn't moving, and so at the end of the day, it's always going to look like it's Isaac Wilson's fault. I'm not going to keep getting into this, but I will add, if Utah had made those 2 field goals in the first half, would Isaac have been benched in the second half? I don't know. Would Kyle Whittingham and Mike Bajakian feel a little bit more comfortable with Isaac had those 2 field goals gone in? I probably think so. At that point, you're sitting there with a much better score. It's still not great, right? But at least you have a better score. You know, you go into halftime leading 13-7, and you feel better about yourself. It's very little, especially if you can add that later touchdown. Now you've got almost a 2-touchdown lead. I mean, things are looking much better, right? That's the situation here, is where, you know, where was this decision made? Was it made because Isaac wasn't moving the ball, or was it made because 2 field goals were missed? And that's a real challenge. And so I don't know. I don't know. We're going to see. And if there really is a situation where they need a new voice or a new person in the field to be able to do it, yeah, Brandon's your guy probably, right? Maybe it's Sam Heward. I don't think so, that he didn't even travel with the team. So where Utah goes with this will be really fascinating. We didn't get to speak to Kyle Whittingham today. This is Monday. They don't do a presser on the days that they have bye weeks. We'll get to talk to him tomorrow briefly after practice, and so we'll kind of see what happens there. But there's not a lot of answers right now. And this offense needs to continue to find the answers, and they're just not doing it. But let's move to the defense, because the defense, you know, last week, you know, I said that this defense has been doing a good job, right? If not to probably a great job in most aspects of the game. And then this week came out and it just didn't work. Now, to kind of preface that, well, first off, Utah, they allowed 228 rushing yards, which is just absurd considering what Utah does, right? And so that's a really difficult thing. But to preface that, like I said, you didn't have Junior Tafuna in the game. You didn't have Keanu Tenavasa in the game. 2 guys that have been a key cog in that defensive line they weren't able to help. And yes, Dallas Vakalahi came in and did a great job, right? Like, he did really well, was the highest graded player on defense. So, I mean, like, you got a great guy in there kind of clogging up the lanes, doing what he needed to. Early on was being really disruptive, that kind of stuff, right? But at the end of the day, this team allowed so many yards rushing. I'm just gonna go through their leading rushers in this game. So their leading rusher was Jamarian Burnett at 81 yards on 8 carries, so he averaged 10.1 yards per carry. Before this game, he had 75 total rushing yards all season. He's a freshman, so it's gonna, there's gonna be some games where he's gonna make a breakout and, he's gonna have his game. And so that's not completely unusual. But he totally eclipsed his entire season's total in one game against a Utah team that often will hold teams to 81 yards total. And he did it himself. Okay. Rashawn Sanford, 72 yards on 16 carries. He averaged 4.5. Not great, but not, bad either. Still about that 5-yard average. But his entire rushing total coming into that game for the season was 222 yards. He was their second leading rusher. He got 72 yards. Okay, so your top two now have quite a bit of yards, right? Okay, but beyond that, you've got other players. Zion Chris, he's your quarterback. He was put in there. You can see why he was put in there. Honestly, I don't want to call him a phenomenal quarterback because his passing wasn't great. Let's see. Utah held him, 6 of 13 for 61 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 1 interception. So it's not like he was beating players a ton with his arm, right? It just wasn't there. 2 of those 6 completions were touchdowns, and so he benefits that way, right? Like, one was a 21-yard touchdown off of the bad punt that Baumeister had. So just not great. And so, the ones that he did get touchdowns, that sucks for you. But at the end of the day, he's a running back playing quarterback. And he's very shifty, right? He got in there, and there was a lot of times where Utah was close, and he just found ways, right? Like, there's one early on where he probably maneuvered around 5 different Utah defenders and made them miss. I mean, it was a phenomenal effort, right? But he's still young, and he's still not going to be the guy, and yet he still managed 45 yards on 17 carries. Not a ton. He actually took some negative yardage early on, and that factored into it. But he gets that. And then you have your leading rusher for the season, Stacey Sneed, finishes with 32 yards on 8 carries for 4-yard average. Okay, you did better against him because he had only, on the season he had 245 yards. But at the same time, all of those others just didn't help. Right? 228 yards is not great. If you held, the team to any one of those numbers, like the 81 yards or 72 as a team, you're talking about a completely different game. I don't think that Houston does really anything. They can't get downfield. Yes, this defense did a phenomenal job and held them at the goal line twice. I mean, it was a remarkable effort from this team to just do their job and keep them out of the end zone. So you've got to credit them for that. But at the same time, in that run game, was just not great. I saw on Twitter a lot of people frustrated with Lander Barton and where he's been. And I don't want to call out him because, I try not to call out these players because, it is what it is. But he leads the team in tackles that day, right? And there's some obvious plays that he missed. And this is a guy that I think is trying to think too much right now. He's trying to put too much pressure on himself after an injury, where for a while, Karene Reed was off the field and he was trying to do too much. And once again, it kind of snowballs, right? As I said last week, when a player has to think about it, they've lost on defense. It's got to be instinctual. You've got to feel comfortable. And right now, he's just not looking like he feels that, right? And he's frustrated. As much as fans are frustrated, he's frustrated even more. I know this, and it's hard, right? Because he wants to be able to be this player that he was. He comes in this high-level recruit, and everybody's excited about him, and his first 2 years looked great, and then he's injured, and now suddenly it looks like he's regressed a ton. And, in some respects he has, but once again, like I talked about on the offense, when these things happen where things start snowballing, it's really tough to kind of get out of that, right? And if you have other players contributing and doing stuff, it becomes much easier for you to kind of get out of that rut quicker. But right now he's thinking too much, and that's his biggest challenge, is he's coming in there and he's not making the plays that he knows instinctually usually what to do. And usually he was that player where he had so much instinct for where he needed to be that he could just get there. And he's just not He's not figuring it out right now, right? But once again, that goes to some of these other players that are injured. When you have players that you don't necessarily have that chemistry with, where you're used to playing with these guys, it changes it up. And Utah's they've done a really good job over the years of being able to have that, quote, next man up mentality, right? That's something that they pride themselves on. But that doesn't mean it's not a challenge. You've got so many new faces around you that it becomes a challenge to know, okay, what are their tendencies? What is going on? There was a basketball game with Steph Curry playing the Jazz, a couple days ago. And he made a pass that he's made so many times before that was going to normally to Klay Thompson. It was just like, it was so much embedded in his brain that he just knew the right way. It was a behind the back pass that he knew Klay was going to be there because he had that situational awareness and everything was going to be there. Klay's not there on the team anymore. And so suddenly all of a sudden that pass went out of bounds. It's that type of stuff where you get so comfortable with players. And I get it. These guys play all off season. They've been working in practices forever. You should have that now. But it still takes time with some of these things, especially with so many moving parts on defense, where the things that you felt, okay, I know that I can cover this, but if I make a mistake, I know Karene's got me here, right? Or I know that Junior Tafuna is going to cover this up, so I just have to focus on this. All those things matter. But now you're thinking about it, and it becomes much more of a challenge. And that's kind of where Utah's at. That's where Lander's at. It's just been kind of a challenge that one of the biggest frustrations for Utah, and I know that they're frustrated with it, is the no havoc plays, right? They didn't get any sacks in this game. This is a Houston team that has allowed 24 sacks this year, 3.5 per game coming into that game, and Utah didn't get any. Now, like I said, Chris was very slippery. He was very tough to tackle, and so there's some of that. And I understand people just want to look at a stat line and be frustrated and vent and get it out. But some of that is Chris, right? He was very good at being mobile in the pocket. Utah did the right thing this time. It wasn't like they lost containment. They were there. He's just very good at getting out of those situations. So I'm not willing to fully put that, as something as a loss for Utah. I think they did their job for the most part. Obviously, there's more that they can improve on. They understand it. There's things that they need to do. The grades show that in terms of what they need to do in terms of tackling and pressures and different things that way. So it's not like this is all rosy. But at the same time, I think there's some nuance on that one just simply because of how good Chris was, right? He's going to make your grade different because you're not able to contain him. So it was what it is. Moving on to special teams, though. Special teams, it's not been a great season. It just hasn't. Cole Becker has been usually really solid for Utah in the place-kicking game and has really struggled in his field goals. He misses one from 46. He misses one from 52, both in the second quarter. Really kind of took the wind out of Utah's sails and just didn't help. But on top of that, you had Baumeister, who just really wasn't getting a ton in the punting game. And not every punt is going to be great, right? The biggest one that really struggled was his 36-yard punt when Utah was backed up into the 1-yard line. There's not much you can do with that. That really set up Houston well to get their first score of the game. It happens, right? But there's been a few of these where the punts are either getting blocked or he's not getting the distance that he needs. He's getting the lift. He's just not getting, or the air, whatever you want to call it. He's just not getting the distance, and he's averaging about 44 yards per punt, which is fine. You obviously want it closer to 50 as an average, which would be kind of more one of the top end punters in the country. So he's been fine, right? I don't think there's been a ton of problems with him. I just think recently that's also contributed to it. And when you only punt it 36 yards, especially deep in your own side of the field, that sets up a team very well. And Houston had no problems scoring on that one, and it just kind of compounds on it. So tough all around. I mean, everything is just broken right now, and I think this is becoming a challenge for Utah to just kind of get out of a rut. The offense has led to the defense has led to special teams. All of it has contributed. It's not just one thing that you can point to and say, oh, at the beginning of the season, Utah couldn't score in the red zone. I think Utah fans, not that you don't want us to have that problem, but you would rather go back to that where it's just one problem, right? The team's moving the ball, but they can't score at the clip that they want to. Now, granted, that started a lot of this problem and, snowball from there. But I just think there's just so many things to focus on that it becomes a challenge to be able to know where to fix it. And if they can't get it done in a bye week and everything in a rivalry game against BYU, I don't know that it's going to. And once again, I'm not trying to say that this BYU game is suddenly like, oh, if you can't do it against BYU. No, BYU is a very tough opponent. They're the team that's playing loose. They're playing fun. They're just comfortable. And when you're comfortable as a team and you're still buying in and you're still doing all the right things, all the hard work, it's a tough thing to beat, right? Utah's been that team in 21 and 22. They set themselves up very well, and they were tough to beat because you just have that chemistry and that camaraderie and everything works. Utah beats that, they beat USC in that game where Cam gets the 2-point conversion and everything goes on. Like, those types of plays don't happen if you're feeling the same way that Utah's feeling right now. It just doesn't. I guarantee it. Utah gets beat in that game and things don't go well. But when you're feeling with confidence and you're feeling with fun and you like each other and everything's going well, it becomes so much easier to do that. And so you've got two different teams that are going to come into this game. By the way, that kickoff is going to be 8:15 on ESPN. Yay for all of us. I'm so tired. Ugh. Late games are great, but they're tough. That's just my side note. But yeah, you've got two teams that are going to come into this game in completely different fashion, right? BYU has all of the momentum. They're undefeated. They're playing loose. They're having fun. They're coming off, they've already gotten a win over Utah a couple of years ago. And so now you want to carry on that streak and get it to be 2-0. You haven't won in Rice-Eccles Stadium for a long time. And so now they're going to try to do that. This becomes a very difficult challenge for Utah because if these mistakes continue, it's just going to snowball in this game. So we'll get more into that kind of stuff. We've got a whole 2 weeks before that game, and I honestly don't want to get into this one too early. So we're going to call this one a day. There's a lot that we went over. Agree with it, disagree with it, whatever you want. I'm curious to hear your thoughts as always. It helps me kind of formulate the feelings of the fans and kind of the questions that need to be asked for Utah football. But it's not all over, but at the same time, I understand people are frustrated, right? You're playing for a bowl game right now. Not that I think that suddenly changes this team, but I think you're trying to get some wins. And at this point, go be the disruptor, right? Go ruin BYU's perfect season. Go ruin Iowa State's perfect season. Keep them from getting 10 wins for the first time in program history. Those types of things. Go have fun that way. And if they can kind of recharge themselves and get there, then I think they're going to be okay. But okay being relative to kind of where they're at. But we'll call that a day. Like I said, we'll try to get on Thursday some kind of more insight. Like I said, I want to try to talk about the Isaac Wilson stuff, see how he compares to other freshman quarterbacks and stuff like that, maybe go into the offense and try to find some stuff. Depends on how much time I have this week with everything, but that will be the plan. And enjoy the bye week. Take it as an opportunity to be away. You don't have to worry about whether Utah's going to get a win or a loss this week. Enjoy some time before it gets too cold and just go outside. So enjoy the time. We'll talk with you later.